Let's go ahead now, and we're going to talk about Jesus as the true vine. And, you know, if you were to put it on a spectrum from 1 to 10, and 1 is survive, and 10 is to thrive, okay? And we're talking today about, at this moment, about you. Where are you on that spectrum? Are you in the end of lower than 5? Were you feeling like, wow, I'm just overwhelmed. I got so many issues, so many worries, so many things that are mounting up in my life that it's more like surviving? I've been watching our high schoolers this last couple of years, and I just pray desperately for them not to get really sick, because I watch them doing so much work for school and for their future. And, they seem like they've been at that far end of survive. Some of you, I know, have been going through issue after issue, and not as anything as temporary and transient as flooding in Southern California. How often do we get the kind of rains where we got to worry about it? Not that often. But some of your issues have been a lot worse, okay? Some of you might be saying, well, you know what? I'm at a 6 or a 7. I'm moving in the direction of thriving. So if I were to ask you right now, in your life in general, what would be your number? I'm not going to ask anybody to share it. I just want you to think about that. Everybody got it? Who hasn't got a number yet? Okay. For the apostles, Jesus' most ardent followers, the people Jesus loved the most, for them, if the question had been asked just before Jesus says, I am the true vine, they would have been probably at 0 or in the minus column. What had just happened was Jesus had just spent their last meal together. And he has told them in no uncertain terms that he was about to die. And he was going to die on the cross. And they didn't know what to do. They were wondering what was going to happen. Jesus has just revealed that one of you 12 will betray me. And he's also shown them that their responsibility is to take care of each other, to wash each other's feet. And that was the farthest thing from their mind. They all wanted to have their feet washed, but not be the one to wash their feet. So, it was just an accumulation of things. And they probably would have been way at the barely surviving stage. And so Jesus, as he's walking with them on the way to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's passing by these olive groves and these grapevines, he says, hey guys, I got to tell you something. This is going to really help you. He says, I am the true vine. And so it's in that context that he brings it up. And this is our final saying that Jesus used to identify himself. Yes, Jesus is many things, but he specially chose 7. He says, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. I just flipped those 2. And then he comes to the 7th one. I am the true vine. And each time he says it, he has given us a way of understanding him. And so we're going to look at this passage. It's kind of a long passage. We're going to be in John chapter 15. And normally, when people preach this passage, they only preach the first 6, 7, 8 verses, okay? But really, we're going to go all the way to verse 16. Because really, It looks like two passages, but the second one kind of interprets the first passage. Okay? And so reading it in context, we get that. Some people will preach the whole sermon just using those 5 words, I am the true vine, and they'll talk about all kinds of things. But here, and it's not to say that those things are not correct, but we really want to get what Jesus was intending to be understood by staying with the context. And that's always the most important thing to know, right? People always in the press saying, you took my statement out of context. You see? And so it's so important to stay within the context. You remember that when Jesus says, I am, he was reminding everyone that he was identifying himself with God. Because when Moses, as he encountered the burning bush, and God says, go to the Pharaoh, and Moses says, give me some assurance. If they ask, who is sending you? What name shall I give? And God said, what? I am. And so this was an identification by Jesus that he himself is God. And this is one of the most important ones because what else is he going to teach them after this? Not much. Some people say this is Jesus' valedictory address to his followers. And so there isn't going to be much, and you want to get in the most important things. Another thing that's very interesting about this one is instead of being a public statement, who was he speaking this to? Only his closest. And how many of his closest? Only 11 of them. Because who had left the group by now? Judas. Right. And so, and that is also important in understanding this passage. So we're going to take it in 3 parts. Okay? The first section, 1 to 6, is going to be the vine in relationship first to the Father and then to the branches. Okay? The second part is going to be talking about how to abide. Because the command in the first part that comes out of it is, you must abide. And then he talks about how to abide, and in the final portion, he talks about the fruit. So just to kind of give you a kind of a mental map of where we're going and how we're going to move through this thing. Let's see. All right, so Jesus says, I am the true vine. What extra word did he throw in there? True. Why? To distinguish from what? False vines. Who was the false vine? It was Israel. Throughout the Old Testament, in passage after passage, God speaks of Israel and calls Israel the vine. But every time he says so, God says, and I condemn you because you are a fruitless vine. Okay? And so he's saying, look, just like 24 hours from now, the whole establishment of Israel is going to come down on you guys. But don't worry. They are not the true vine. If they cut you off, don't worry about that because they are not the true vine. They are the fruitless vine. They were called and commissioned by God to be a blessing to all nations, to be the example and the model of what it is to be God's people. How to live and how to be blessed and how to behave and how to treat others. And they haven't done that. And so while you are cut off from them, don't worry about it because they are not the true vine. You stay with me because I am the true vine. He is saying, I am the replacement. And, through the Gospel of John, He has spoken, Jesus has, of himself as the replacement in many, many ways. He was the better and ultimate sacrifice. He was the better temple, the focus of worship. He was the better authority. He was the fulfillment of all the feasts of Israel. He was better than Moses. So all through the Gospel of John, he's saying, I am the superior one of worship and to follow. And so he gives this one now. And at this point, he can say this to them because, like I said, who is missing from the group? Judas. What kind of branches is he going to be talking about in this vine? The ones that have fruit and are going to get trimmed, and the ones that have no fruit, and what's going to happen to them? Removed. Okay, so again, this is the whole context for really understanding this as Jesus is meaning that it be understood. And so we start off, and he says, it isn't just me, guys. I am the vine, but there's somebody who is really in charge, who is really making all of this happen, that's going to make the fruitfulness possible. And who is that? The vine dresser, the Father. Okay, so he puts himself in connection with the vine dresser, and in a certain sense, he himself will be under the care of the vine dresser. And later on, he's going to ask his disciples to be under his care. To say, you can trust me like I trust the Father. So this is how it's moving forward. So that's verse 1. And I should have read it. It says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Verse 2, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, or he trims. Okay? The Greek word, that's probably a better translation, that it may bear more fruit. Verse 3, already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. So these two branches are going to get two entirely different forms of treatment. How many of you guys do gardening? Okay. Really, Mr. Fu? Mrs. Fu, does he really do gardening? He waited so long. I wasn't so sure. Okay. I struggled with my rose bushes for years and years. And when I finally got rid of my oleanders because they were dying, finally I got a rose. It was magnificent. Nice and pretty and yellow, all right? I wanted some yellow. I got one of each type. I got all different kinds. And come Thursday, I returned home. I looked for my rose. What had happened? It was gone. I looked at it, a clean cut. You go in the house, did my wife cut the rose? No, it was the gardener. My one rose. You know what he said to me? Ken, I got to cut the rose so that you can have more roses in the future. I didn't know that. Well, okay. So he's got to go and he's got to trim these things. And Jesus says, not only will you be trimmed, but, don't go overboard on this thing. You're already clean. Now, the last time he said that was just a few hours ago, when they all came into the room and Jesus started to wash their feet, you remember. And what did Peter say? No, Lord, you're the boss. You shouldn't be washing my feet. And then what did Jesus say? Well, you know what? If I don't wash your feet, then, you're not being blessed by me, and you need to be washed. And Peter, of course, Peter being the Mr. Uber guy, he says, then give me a whole bath. And then Jesus says, well, Peter, I've already taught you my word, and you're already clean. So he's saying that again. He says, I have taught you, you have received my word into you, and they have given you life, and you are clean. So in that sense, you are already saved. So we come to that next part, verse 4. We move from what the Father is going to do, now we're going to talk about what the branches have to do. Verse 4. And here's the command. First was description, now the command. He says, abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. You know, we have in California one of the greatest, most majestic living thing that exists anywhere in the world. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Think horticulturally. Redwood, even better. The giant sequoias. You know, the one that's so big that you can drive your car right through the thing? You know, the tallest structure in the San Fernando Valley is about 165 feet. No, 165 feet. Okay, I forget the name of it. It's a bank thing an ornament that they put up. If we took one of those sequoias and we put it anywhere in the valley, we would all be able to look at and see it. Okay? It is not the tallest, the redwoods are the tallest, but in sheer size, in girth, in weight, as well as in height. I saw a nature special where these scientists are climbing up to explore the top of the sequoia. All right? And when they got up there, they found that these trees are so tall that they have an entirely different ecosystem up at the top than they do further down on the tree. Well, these are one of the fastest growing things on the planet per weight. They grow so fast. And you know how they endure? Some of those trees are 3,000 years old. They have survived. They are so majestic. You know why? These trees abide in the earth. They have a root system that is as extensive as it is tall. And trees belong there, right? I remember when I came back from seminary and I was in my office decorating my office, and I thought I wanted a plant in there, and I got a potted ficus. You know how long that potted ficus lasted? 2 weeks. When I was opening my law office, I was first introduced to the potted ficus. And the interior decorator says, "This will go good in your office." You know how long it lasted that time? 1 week. Okay, you know, these things are getting very popular because you put them in these little patios where you don't have any soil, right? But they're high maintenance. They're basically ornamental. Their roots don't go anywhere. And if you don't want them to die, you got to turn that thing upside down, pull it out of its base, cut the roots every once in a while. High maintenance. And if you get the kind of winds we just had come along, what's going to happen? Fall over. No place to abide. Not really. See, and that's the point. Jesus says we are meant for great fruitfulness. But you got to abide. I'll tell you, I think it's innate in every one of us that we're going to be able to look back at the end of our lives and say, I made a difference. My life counted for something. You know why I say that? Because back in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, God says what? He made us in his image and likeness, and he gave us the commission. So someday we should go and we should be the beings that rule and subdue the earth, meaning we are the great caretakers. And that's why I think men love to be in competitive sports, okay? Either playing it or watching it. We want victory. We want success. We want to overcome when it's difficult. But in today's society, we don't get it except through sports and video games. Okay, got to throw that in there too. Things that challenge us, things that we can overcome. And we want to make a difference. We don't want to be just consumers, people who are just occupied and used up resources. We want to look back at our lives and say, you know, just for that moment, I made a difference. I did something significant. And Jesus says, no, you were designed for fruit, but for much fruit. But the problem is you must learn to abide in the vine. And so he challenges them to do that. Most Christians were just in the flimsiest connections. Sometimes I'm out there gardening or I'm washing my car, you know, and I've got that hose on full power. And suddenly it reduces down to a trickle. You guys ever have that happen to you? What happened? It got a kink, right? You know, that thing is round and you pull it out to a certain way and it just forms a natural kink. And that's all it took. You know, the Christians that don't have that kind of abiding, like I was talking about with the sequoia, the kind of Christian that has that kind of abiding that results in a dribble because of kinks, I think Jesus wants to move through our souls, like the waters that move through Arizona and Utah and carve the Grand Canyon and all those beautiful, great things to reveal that image and likeness that God had put into us. But we won't let him. And so we do not abide and we do not bear fruit. Verse 5, Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. So he's repeating this. This time, like I said, he starts to bring the other connection, not with the Father, but with the branches. He says again, whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. That's the promise. That's a flat-out declaration statement. But he says, on the other hand, apart from me, you can do nothing. You will bear no fruit. And he says it emphatically. It is natural for us to bear much fruit. Verse 6, and if anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like the branch and withers, and the branches are gathered and thrown into the fire and burned. They are cleared. And this is just a description of what happens out on the field. So by now, his 11 know that they're going to be cut off from Israel. But that's not the true vine. But you know what? They're going to move from survive to thrive if they will abide. And so that is the hope. And so by now, Jesus probably has them kind of pumped up and kind of ready to want to abide. And here I'm going to need to pull some verses together. We have 7 to 10, but we also got to pull 12 and 13 and 17 because they all talk about what it takes in order to abide. Okay? So let's start reading at verse 7. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. We usually jump to the second half because we like that part. But what's the secret of abiding? Yes, know the word, do the word. Yes, So that's what we've got to do, to know the Word and to do the Word. Let me read to you a funny article that I have from CNN, okay? It starts off like this. NFL legend Mike Ditka was giving a news conference one day after being fired as a coach of the Chicago Bears when he decided to quote the Bible. Quote, Scripture tells you that all things shall pass, close quote. A choked-up Ditka said after leading his team to only 5 wins during the previous season. Quote, this too shall pass, close quote. All right, the writer continues on. He says, Ditka fumbled his biblical citation, though. The phrase, this too shall pass, doesn't appear in the Bible. How many of you thought, oh yeah, he's quoting the Bible? Most people would, right? Ditka was quoting a phantom scripture that sounds like it belongs in the Bible, but look closer and it's not there. Okay, little exercise time. Right hand if you think it's from the Bible, left hand if you think it's not. Okay, you ready? No, I'm going to give you the quotes, all right? You ready? God helps those who help themselves. Right hand or left hand? Left hand. Okay, spare the rod, spoil the child. Right hand or left hand? Left hand. It is actually a paraphrase. Okay?
Paraphrases are allowed.
Nah, you won't find it if you use your concordance. Okay. Anyway, he goes on and he talks about phantom biblical passages. He includes others that goes like this. This one, we would have surely raised our hand. God works in mysterious ways. Okay? And it's not in the Bible. It's a compilation of ideas and thoughts, and somebody's put it together in a nice one, a nice sounding thing, and we say, yeah, that sounds so biblical. Here's one I love. Cleanliness is next to godliness. That's got to be in the Bible because it uses the word God, right? Again, left hand. It's not. Ben Franklin came up with that one. Okay? The one God works in mysterious ways came from an English poet by the name of William Cowper. And so it comes up just in so many different ways. You know, and the point is this. Know the Bible, do the Bible. That's why we began this Bible reading program. You see, if all the Bible you get is what you hear on a Sunday morning from the pulpit, it's not enough to make you much fruit type of a branch. And so the more of it that you know and can do, that's how you're going to get there. It says, and by this my Father, verse 8, is glorified that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. I look at myself, and the way I know I'm a disciple is not because I've gone to seminary, not because I have the privilege to preach, not because I'm a good guy at the church and I help with this and I help with that. But I know the Word, and I do the Word, and that results in fruit. That is the test that Jesus says. This is the way you show yourself, you prove yourself to be his disciple. Then he says in verse 9, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. And this is what you continue to abide in. Verse 10, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. And when he finishes this paragraph, he's brought keeping the commandments in with keeping in God's love. Okay? And basically, They are one and the same. Through one, you experience the other. That's kind of hard for us to get, but let me illustrate this. There came a time when Adam, having a good time in the garden, ran into a most unusual creature, a talking serpent. And the serpent came to him and said things like, "Hath God said?" But it's not true. You will know good and evil. You will not die. And the whole tone of the serpent's voice is to say, God doesn't want you to get this stuff. He's a little jealous and he's holding back. He doesn't love you like you think he loves you. And if Adam had only said no, he would have gained the knowledge of good and evil because it was a test. And he would have then been able to eat of the tree of life instead of being kept out of the garden so that he would be able to come in and eat it. God gave him this test through this rule, this one simple rule, this one exclusion out of all that was in the garden. And because he wasn't sure about God's love, that God's word is the same as love. When I teach parenting, one of the things that parents ask about, how do I keep my kid from running in the parking lot, getting out of control and leaving my hand? I tell them, hold on while we cross the parking lot. And when they say that, they're saying it in love, aren't they? But the kids see it as a restriction on their joy, their freedom, their opportunity to test their legs, to go where they want to go. Same factors are in play. And so God says, follow my word. These are the words of love. Believe it, follow it, trust it, and you will be experiencing my love. Then he adds one word that we must not only know, but do. In verse 12 and 13 and 17, he says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lays down his life for his friends." And he's saying, I'm going to set the example for you, my friends. This is how I have loved you, and this is how you should love one another. Verse 17, these things I command you so that you will love one another. He's saying sacrifice for one another. Deny yourself for one another. Be considerate to one another. When you do these things, when you sacrifice, when you self-deny, when you are being considerate, don't think about your losses. Don't think about how in the power position you have gone down a notch. Don't think that you'll never get it if you keep letting others go first. But do it with love. And make sure that love is what's driving all of this. A lot of us are put in positions where we have to sacrifice, where we have to self-deny, where we have to be considerate. Please, you're doing it anyway. Make sure your motivation is love, so that when you're doing it, you are following the commandment, and it does result in fruitfulness. I know parents who become so resentful of all they have to give up for the kids. I know spouses who have to do so much of the majority of the work, pulling the weight, and they become resentful. You got to do it. But if you do it with love, it changes the whole thing. And you gain all this credit with God and you develop fruitfulness. And that's what we're talking about in the final portions. What are the fruit that we gain? Number one, we know the love of God. We experience it. We enjoy it. Number two, we stay out of harm's way by obeying his commandments, realizing that they are not burdens, but they are the core secrets to true living and deep happiness. The third thing that's been mentioned is our prayers will be answered because we're praying just the same way Jesus would pray. Because we know his commandment, we know his mind, we know his heart. So we're able to pray just as he is praying. Fourth, God's glory is magnified. Number 5, and for that, see, those were from the previous verses. Number 5, he says, verse 11, he says, "These things I have spoken to you, that my joy will be in you, and your joy will be full." Let's face it, I've gotten to the point where roller coasters don't have their appeal anymore. I love roller coasters. I took my kids and indoctrinated them to love roller coasters. You know, new fancy restaurants, they don't have that appeal for me anymore. Everything that was a thrill. What I'm finding is, you get to the point where the external stimuli for joy is not that powerful or necessary, because true joy, far better than thrill, is gushing from within. And nothing is more valuable in life than joy. Nehemiah told those guys when they had to come back and do the hard work of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, which had been lying there in ruins for so many decades. And they were demoralized. They were in the survive mode. They couldn't think about thriving. And he says, look, if you do this, you will receive the joy of the Lord. And the joy of the Lord will be your strength. Have you ever had that sense of joy where it just gave you new energy to work harder, to keep at it, to put in even more? Remember Paul when he was in the jail and he was writing that letter to the Philippians? He said, what? I'm not defeated. I'm full of joy here. Okay? I'm far from miserable. And so I have that strength, and I can do all things. I can face the hardships, and I can party even without a cake. You see, that's another thing we get. But the last thing we get is in 14, 15, and 16. And this is the best. We save the best for last. You are my friends if you do what I command. No longer do I call you servant, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends, for all that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you, that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should persist, continue, never evaporate, never dry up. It should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. Jesus says, I'm going to call you friend. Now, when I was in junior high school, I had somebody in the high school who called me his friend. His name was Tommy Allen. And I first met him when I arrived as a 7th grader. Little black kid who grew up in my neighborhood. Did I say little black kid? That's wrong. He came into junior high looking like he was ready to compete in the Mr. Universe contest. I don't know how he did that. All of us were still going through those developmental stages, moving out of pudginess, This guy had muscles on his muscles already. Of course, he was all sport and the star of all the sports. And for some reason, he decided to call me friend. Now, there's a big difference. I didn't say I called him my friend. A lot of people would have loved to call him their friend. A lot of the girls especially, okay? And I could have said, he's my friend. But I tell you, one day when I was a hall monitor, Eugene violated one of the rules. Eugene was another black kid from my neighborhood, and I reported him. I don't know what got into my head. I reported him, and he caught me in the lockers later that day. And he was about to stuff me into one of the lockers after pulverizing me down to size. Tommy Allen was his friend. He came up, "Hey, Eugene, what you doing? You know, what does it look like I'm going to do?" He said, "Nah, don't do that. You're my friend." Eugene, dropped me to the floor, walked away. I could have told Eugene, "Hey, don't hit me. Tommy Allen's my friend." You think that would have made a difference? The difference was when Tommy Allen came and told Eugene that I was his friend. You know, many people in the Bible, most of them, even the great ones, are not called the friend of God. Moses, Abraham, were called the friend of God. But over here, Jesus flips it, and he says, "I'm going to call you my friend. I'm going to take care of you. I am the true vine. If you abide in me, great things can happen." You will change an attitude, A. You will change in behavior, B. You will change in character. And the image of God that is in you is going to shine, and glory will go to the Father. Every Christmas, they bring out that famous show, Charlie Brown Christmas. Remember the star of that show? Not Charlie, not Linus, not Snoopy, the tree. Remember that tree? Remember what an ugly-looking, scraggly tree that was. And yet, by the end of the program, beautiful, majestic, noble, changed. Listen, before Jesus says, "I am the true vine," those guys, those apostles, looked just like that tree. But by the time they had learned to abide, and as each one went to the death, all but one through martyrdom, they became giant sequoias. What a transformation. Some of these guys, we don't even remember their names. But God blesses them in such a way. He's made it so that we would be significant. And we do it by becoming those who abide as branches in the vine. May we learn to abide, because Jesus is the true vine. Okay, we're going to move straight into our communion service.